Some of you might be wondering, how do you wind up in this position? How do you wind up in this row of heavy hitters? I have no idea. I was invited to give one of these big ideas, and I met Kitty a couple hours ago, and she said, "How would you like to be first?" And I laughed. And that meant I volunteered to be first. Well, it's a privilege to be here and to be asked to present one of these big ideas. It's also really scary. If I can steal an analogy from Forrest Gump, I think coming up with an idea is it's sort of like being offered an old box of chocolates, which is you worry that all the good ones have already been taken, and that when you reach in there, all you're going to find are, coconut-filled stuff. And as a scientist, it's even harder because you're aware of the legacy of great ideas that have preceded you for centuries, and you think, well, how am I going to possibly come up with something fresh and interesting? Before I get to the idea, I want to calibrate what we mean in science by big. Big ideas often entail big questions about our past and about our future. And this year we mark the anniversaries of 3 very big, huge ideas. You all know that this year is the 150th anniversary of Charles Darwin's monumental work that launched an enormous scientific revolution, and you're going to be able to hear more about that in the coming days. But next month is also the anniversary of 2 other milestones that happened 40 and 50 years ago. The more recent of the 2 is the crowning achievement of the space age, the first landing and walk on the moon, July 20th, 1969. And it's also the anniversary of a much less remembered but giant step in the progress of our species in understanding our biological and technological roots 2 million years ago in the Stone Age. It was 50 years ago, July 17th, 1959, after a nearly 30-year search, that Mary and Louis Leakey found the first fossil hominid remains in East Africa at Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania. And thanks to the revolution in anthropology started by the Leakeys, we now understand that we are all descendants of skilled tool makers and explorers that left Africa just 60,000 years ago, populated 5 continents, and with some new tools, built that spaceship that went to the moon and came back. Those are all some pretty big ideas. So tonight, I want to ask, what are we going to discover or achieve in the next decade or the next century that future generations will celebrate, like those anniversaries? Are we going to find anything that would turn our worldview upside down? Anything of the magnitude of the revolution in thought that started 150 years ago? Is there anything still unknown, comparable to the mystery of the origin of species or the origin of humans? Or anything as momentous as walking on the moon? And I say there certainly is. It's the ultimate matter of origins, the origin of life in the universe. Does life exist elsewhere in the universe? If so, what does it look like? Now, these are not new questions. For thousands of years, humanity has been gazing out at the stars and wondering what's out there. In 1584, Catholic monk Giordano Bruno, he asserted that, quote, "There are countless suns and countless earths, all rotating around their suns. The countless worlds in the universe are no worse and no less inhabited than our earth." He was charged with heresy and burned at the stake. We're a bit more free to ponder these possibilities today. I should mention, by the way, he was forgiven in the year 2000. So. Forgiveness is a big theme that runs through the festival, I know, so just thought I'd add that. Only took 400 years. But I'll tell you right away that every scientist I know who's knowledgeable in this arena thinks that life elsewhere is very, very likely, a virtual certainty. Why do they think so? Well, it's the truly astronomical numbers of potential Earth-like planets that are out there. Some estimate 10 billion alone in our galaxy, and 1 billion trillion. I mean, I think the only thing approaching that number is probably the national deficit right now, but 1 billion trillion, if you can imagine that, in the entire universe. So what's out there? As one astronomy organization has put it, if it's just us, that's a terrible waste of space. So play along with me and imagine. Imagine what impact would definitive evidence of life elsewhere have? Think of the philosophical implications for our perception of our place in the universe. If life is more widespread, it could be older, more diverse, more complex than what we've seen on Earth. Where would that leave us? What would life elsewhere do to our sense of uniqueness and of purpose in the universe? If you consider the reactions Darwin provoked when he placed humans in the animal kingdom as kin to fleas and tapeworms and monkeys, I hear that some people are still upset about that. So there are two issues to decide. First, can we find out? And I like our chances. You know, 150 years ago, we knew nothing about the simplest questions about life on Earth. 50 years ago, we knew nothing about our own origins. And walking on the moon or on another planet was pure science fiction. Calibrate that ahead a century, I like our chances. Who knows what we're going to be capable of in the next 50 to 100 years. The second issue, which I'm sure some of you are ruminating, is how hard should we try? Is this a noble undertaking or a complete waste of resources? Don't we have more important things to worry about? The economy, geopolitics? Why bother? Well, consider what somebody had to say who I think knows a few things about this. Neil Armstrong, just last year at a celebration at NASA. He said one of the most important roles of government is to inspire and motivate its citizens, and particularly its young citizens, to love to learn, to strive to participate in and contribute to societal progress. And as a biologist, I say it's something that we, as the greatest explorers among all the Earth's species, are driven to do. It's our destiny to search for new worlds and to explore the unknown. That is, if we don't exterminate life here or blow ourselves to hell. And fortunately, wisely, much of the festival program is geared to discussing exactly how to avoid doing just that. Thank you very much.
Hi. My name is Marina Pisklakova, and I'm from Russia. I have the same question, what I'm doing among all these amazing people. Coming from Russia means I was born in the Soviet Union. And of course, in the Soviet Union, as many of you may know, everything was big. Ideas were big. Machinery was the biggest in the world. So I grew up with everything being biggest, better, significant. But actually, my experience in life comes from a small idea. At the end of the 80s, I was working at the Russian Academy of Sciences, studying population. And that's when I stumbled through the research to the issue of domestic violence. And I realized that this is the issue nobody speaks about. But I met women who suffered from that every day. And they were just, not women out there somewhere in a different country. they were mothers of my son's classmates. So I got this small idea to do something about that. A small idea to start a helpline in Moscow for battered women in '93. And honestly, that's all I wanted to do, is just to help them somehow, to be there for them when everybody says it's your fault. But I think when a small idea reflects and touches lives of real people, it becomes a big idea. That's what happened with my work. For the first year I was working alone. I didn't even know other people who would be interested in doing the same, who would be interested in working with me on a helpline, doing cases. I had to learn a lot. But then it was like, I don't know, an opening. I started meeting right people at the right time. And then from the helpline, I realized that we need to change much more. We need to change legislation, attitude of the government, and it became bigger than I could ever imagine. I mean, it got me here. That's how big it became. I think a big idea is the idea that unifies people to bring a real change to lives of real people. And a big idea, and again, you know, I had to give up my scientific career. I became women's rights activist. And that's what I do now. But that changed my life. I've learned so many things. I've met so many wonderful people. So from a small idea of helping somebody, I came to really, not just big idea, big change in my life and lives of people around me. Another thing I've learned is that with our big ideas, it has to be rooted in a responsibility. It has to be rooted in a responsibility, thinking through all consequences of our actions. In other words, never really assume that you know better how to do it. I can give you one example. When I was doing training in Kyrgyzstan for women who work in the area of violence against women. And I was doing a training on the Convention of Elimination of Discrimination against Women and touching cultural traditions. One of the cultural traditions in that country is bridal theft, abduction of brides for marriage, for forced marriage. So I tried to talk about that to the activists in that country, thinking that we are on the same page. We are from the Soviet Union, we speak Russian, I assumed we think alike because we do the similar work. And suddenly I hit a wall and they say, no, these are our traditions, we don't touch it. I didn't know what to do about that. I tried to approach it in different ways, the way I was trained, and nothing worked. But in the evening, we were doing, and one of the women there next to me, she said, well, my husband abducted me. I was forced to marry him. We have 3 children together, and I forgave him. And I couldn't comprehend it. I couldn't judge her, but I just said, okay, then, I don't know what I'm doing. I had to admit. But in the evening, we had this session where I was showing them different group work, how to work with women in the groups. And we chose a topic because dealing with violence against women, we always dealing with very heavy issues of, listening to hard stories and death. And the topic was, what would I do if I known that I have to leave for 1 year? And the same woman said to me, I would do one thing that I wouldn't do otherwise, leave my husband. I had said, you know, you don't have to die for that. What I'm saying here is that when we think we have a big idea, and that was my lesson, we also need to be responsible and to be open to anything when we do our work. So my big idea is that big ideas start with small ideas and take dedication and commitment. Thank you.
Well, this gets harder and harder. I'm Robert Sokolow. I'm on the Faculty of Engineering at Princeton. I've been interested in climate change, and the way I've been putting it recently, the challenge is fitting on the Earth. That's my job. That's our job. You're going to hear the word Copenhagen a number of times, including this evening's speaker, John Holdren, the science advisor to President Obama. Copenhagen is an event, a world discussion in December this year. And the world is going to try to start a new chapter of governance related to climate change, because the one we're in now ends by the way it was set up. It ends in 2012. And most politicians will tell you that there is a logjam. The developing countries were given a pass in 1992 when this chapter was begun, meaning that they had no specific responsibilities and no deadline after which they would become involved. The world was divided into two, and the group that were supposed to act are called Annex I countries, and it's mostly the developed world. It was an expression of post-colonial guilt. The developing countries should not have to do anything until the developed countries got their act together. And the message that the science community is now giving, and it's really simple arithmetic, is that you can't get to a safe climate with those rules, because the developing countries have been growing all the while, and now half of the world's emissions are from the developing countries and half from the developed countries. Developing countries' rhetoric, developed over this period of time, has said, we shouldn't have to do anything until you fix things up. You made the mess. And look how many poor people are in our countries. Billions of people with very little, very, very little. So the question is there any way to break this logjam? The developing countries want to start the discussion from justice. The developed countries want to start the discussion from inclusivity. There's an obvious and very simple idea. Suppose you could actually identify every individual's contribution to climate change, call it their footprint, and suppose you simply said that everyone who has the same footprint as an individual had the same responsibility for dealing with climate change, no matter where they lived. That's the idea, that very simple idea that a number of us hope will re-energize a very stale debate and break the logjam. I and some colleagues have an article coming out next week, and Kitty said something that you've got an extra edge on is just what we want here. So next week, July 6th, the embargo of a paper that's going to come out in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which just works out the numbers and shows, I hope, to both developing and developed country diplomats that it might actually work, that if you wanted a new agreement and you based it on having basically the high emitters or the richer people take charge of this problem together when they're of comparable lifestyles, they have comparable obligations. We know there are a lot of wealthy people in developing countries. They must stop hiding. We know there are a lot of poor people. They need special attention. Let's talk about individuals, not about countries. It's called cosmopolitan justice by the philosophers. It's called planetary identity. It's called beyond nationalism. I hope it's an idea that can work. Thank you.
I'm Marion Wright Edelman of the Children's Defense Fund. And I'm delighted to be here, and Kitty dragooned me at the last minute too, and I'm in a state of shock that I am here. But I have a very, very simple idea, and I think an important one. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great German Protestant theologian who died opposing Hitler's Holocaust, believed that the test of the morality of a society is how it treats its children. The United States of America flunks Bonhoeffer's test every hour of every day, as we let a child drop out of school every 10 seconds of the school day. We let a child be born into poverty in this very wealthy and blessed nation every 33 seconds, and a majority of their parents work and play by the rules, cannot earn enough to escape poverty. We let a child be born without health insurance every 39 seconds. 90% of their parents play by the rules, working, can't get health coverage, and our child and maternal mortality figures are a disgrace. We let a child be abused or neglected every 40 seconds. We let a child have a child every minute. Teenage pregnancy is still a big problem. We're making progress. It's reversed. We can fill up the city of Atlanta each year with children having children. And we let a child be killed by guns every 3 hours. And we were making progress. The trends have gone back up, and in a new report next week or so will show that 3,185 children will die from gunfire. We have the equivalent of Virginia Tech every 4 days, and this chronic killing of children goes on in our country. So my big idea is that America is going to wake up, and we're going to pass Bonhoeffer's test. We're going to build a movement, and I hope women and mothers and grandmothers are going to stand up and say enough. We're going to have young people who want a different kind of world, and that we're going to adopt the safe and healthy development of children as our measure of success. If we do not invest and begin to protect and stop neglecting our children, we're going to become a second-rate power. It is not only the right thing to do to make sure that children are safe and healthy and educated, it is also the common sense thing. And imagine what would happen if America passed Bonhoeffer's test and provided a moral beacon for the rest of the world about what democratic capitalism can really do for its own children, its own people. And imagine if America's example and the idea that children should be the cornerstone of national and global policy, what would happen if America's example spread across the world, and what would that mean for the potential for a peaceful and just world? So my idea is an old one, but a simple one, is that we should make children and passing on a better world for the next generations the cornerstone of all that we're about, and I think we'll have a very different world. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Paul Ryan, and I'm a member of Congress from Wisconsin. You can probably tell from my pragmatic attire and my objectively striped tie that I'm a Republican. I also must say, asking a politician to come out with a big idea in less than 3 minutes, that takes guts. But I am not a U.S. Senator, and I'm a House member, therefore I think I'll have a chance at doing this. My big idea is that America will actually come to grips with its fiscal crisis. Here's what I mean when I say that. Right now, according to the General Accountability Office, we have a $62 trillion unfunded liability of debt that overhangs our economy. The Dallas Federal Reserve says it's $100 trillion. My children are 4, 6, and 7 years old. By the time they're my age, in their late 30s, they will have to pay double the amount of taxes we pay today just to pay for this government at that time. And so the problem we have is our political class has been broken on this issue. Both political parties have failed to fix this. Every year you delay fixing these fiscal problems we have in America, we go about $3 to $4 trillion deeper in debt. 3 years ago, I became the ranking Republican on the Budget Committee. So I decided to come up with a big idea and come up with a plan to fix our fiscal situation. 3 programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, represent this unfunded liability, this huge mountain of debt and taxes that will befall the next generation. My plan's called A Roadmap for America's Future. You can go to AmericanRoadmap.org to take a look at it. The point I'm making is not that I have the best ideas. This is just how I think we ought to fix it. My reason for putting this plan out there is to encourage others to do the same so that we actually get onto the dialogue of fixing our fiscal problem in our country. And I think there's one group that will actually lead us to doing this. There is one particular group of people that will bring the Republicans and the Democrats together, because I think you're going to have to make this a bipartisan thing at the end of the day. And that one group of people don't really know who they are. They're not really always Americans. And that group of people are bond traders. Because there's going to come a time where we can't keep selling all these bonds, where we can't keep borrowing all this money from people. And America will have to come to grips with the fiscal problems in our country. Unfortunately, in my opinion, we're going in the wrong direction on that front. But I do believe this country, because I now see this as an issue of generativity, it will make us happy if we pass on to the next generation a better, more prosperous country, and we will, at the end of the day, solve these problems. Thank you.
Thanks so much. My name's Elisa Massimino, and I run a human rights advocacy organization called Human Rights First, which promotes respect for human rights and the rule of law in this country and around the world. I came here today from Dallas, where I was with my family to celebrate my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And I learned a lot there about happiness. But I also learned something new after all these years from my father. He confessed that while he knew it had made things hard for us and for my mother, the years that he spent serving our country in uniform had helped shape the values of our family. And so it got me thinking about a big idea that works. It's not a new idea, and it's not my idea. I guess it's one of those coconut-filled ones in the chocolate box. But those are always my favorite ones. 60 years ago, in the wake of World War II, the community of nations came up with an idea that war could be tempered in its brutality, particularly with respect to civilians and those taken prisoner during hostilities. All nations agreed, and the 4 1949 Geneva Conventions were born. These 4 treaties, which deal with prisoners of war, civilians, and the injured, are grounded in the idea that there's a baseline standard of humane treatment to which all people, no matter whether they're terrorists or spies or combatants, are entitled by virtue of their humanity. These standards reflect our common humanity, but they're also grounded in the practical realities of warfighting. And that's why when I went looking for allies to help us put U.S. policy on the treatment of prisoners back on track, the first people to volunteer and step forward were retired military leaders, generals and admirals, including 5 former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, the Geneva Conventions were formalized only 60 years ago, but the ideas behind them and our commitment to upholding those ideals is as old as the nation itself. From the beginning of the Revolutionary War, the British monarchy labeled the Americans as traitors and insurgents. They denied them the status of honorable soldiers in arms. They abused them terribly. General George Washington knew that all 31 of the prisoners taken by the British at Bunker Hill had died in captivity, many under terrible circumstances. And of the 2,607 Americans taken prisoner at the capitulation of Fort Washington, all but 800 had died in captivity by 1778. There was a loud public outcry, an eye for an eye, but General Washington stood fast. He insisted as a point of honor that the Americans would not only uphold the laws of war, they would define a new law of war that reflected the humanitarian principles for which our republic had been founded. Treat them with humanity, he said, and let them have no reason to complain of our copying the brutal example of the British Army in their treatment of our unfortunate brethren who have fallen into their hands. But General Washington, while he intended to demonstrate the moral superiority of the American cause, he also took this approach because in the end he knew what all generals know, that soldiers who mistreat prisoners, who take up cruel practices, are bad and unruly soldiers, that the discipline and the morale of the entire fighting force could be undermined by such conduct. For Washington, the issue was clear on both a moral and a practical level. That was 234 years ago, so why am I talking about it now? Well, in just a few weeks, 3 executive task forces set up by President Obama will report back with recommendations for how the United States should treat prisoners in its custody, what standards we'll use to interrogate them, how to detain them, and how to try those suspected of committing crimes. They should start with an idea that works, the Geneva Conventions. I'm sharing my glasses with
Good. Whoops. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is David Fanning. I'm the founder and executive producer of the PBS documentary series Frontline. Oh, thank you. I'm going to lose my way now. I've been thinking about the great media crack-up, and here are 3 ideas. One that works, one that doesn't work that well, and a big new idea. The idea that works is called public broadcasting. If for no other reason, that every year the Roper poll finds PBS as the public institution most trusted by the American people, by a long way, well above the nearest, the courts of law, the schools, the press. The idea that doesn't work that well is public broadcasting. Public television has some very good programs, and I say that because many of my good friends are in the room who make them, but it always seems to be at war with itself. And I don't have to tell you about Yanni at the Acropolis and all those pledge programs. Public radio has had a great deal of success, but they're also seeing the difficulties of growing their audience in this new online, video-centric world that we now live in. Which is why I come to my big, new public media idea. I believe we have to reorient public broadcasting, especially television, around journalism as its central mission. And to make that change happen, we have to build something new, online, in the space between radio and television. This is a new journalistic entity, an independent, non-profit media startup. I don't have a name for it yet. I'm listening. thenewbigidea.org. I'm convinced we can immediately attract a collection of the best reporters and editors, and of course, a new generation of online journalists and bloggers. And then if you add the assets of public radio and television, the archives, the podcasts, the video programming, the deep web content we already have, if you do it right, if you give it enough gravitational weight, it will change the ecology of public broadcasting, create a whole new emphasis in our programming. We would set up a kind of a feedback loop. We'd use the power of broadcast to drive audiences to this new online journalism. We could curate and edit and link to the other new public media efforts like the non-profit investigative units, the public insight networks, and you can see the outlines then of a powerful new journalistic enterprise. This is a selfish ambition. This is something I want for Frontline. I want to be a part of it because I no longer want to do this work alone. I want to be part of something bigger, to work with other people who set the bar high, who value fairness, intelligence, and curiosity, and want to produce smart, tough, and literate journalism. This isn't like any other startup. because it has another extraordinary asset, a network of hundreds of local stations and community connections. You know, journalism needs geography. It's done in a place. In many cities, with newspapers in free fall, journalists are trying to put together and create online journalism. This is the opportunity for public broadcasting, to give them a home, make a partnership, create a new independent entity, a local, to take aim at City Hall and the State House, follow the money, get back to the people's business. And of course, as part of a network, the best of those stories become part of the national conversation. Now, there's a reason to fundraise and pledge. Charlie Rose at the Acropolis. And in fact, seriously, that's the part of this big idea that really works. This has a business plan. People give to public broadcasting because it is a civic trust, and because the government treats it as a great public institution. No one else has forged that kind of paying connection with such success. If you count in private philanthropy as well, you have a business plan. You have an existing membership-driven, publicly supported, non-profit model for enterprise journalism. That's my big idea. We'll need the attention of Congress, the administration. There will be changes and fights over funding and governance, setting aside of egos and the creating of unprecedented partnerships. But it's essential for the survival of the first idea, the one that works, the public trust in the very idea of public media. Thank you.
I'm Sandra O'Connor. I'm just an unemployed cowgirl. I'd like to say a word about happiness. For me, one of the things that represents happiness is being in Aspen in July at the Ideas Festival. You'll be pleased to know that I'm the last of these little big idea people. I want to say a word about education. We didn't have public schools when our nation began. They came later. When they came, people formed them because they thought there ought to be a way to educate young people to become good, participating citizens. And that was a good idea in its day. We have let that idea run out of gas, and I propose that we have to reinvigorate education in this country. Polls tell us that barely 1/3 of our citizens can even name the 3 branches of government, much less say what they do. That's pretty serious. We are failing in our duties to educate the younger generations, and ourselves, I might add, but we're working at that here in Aspen. So we have to find more effective ways to educate our children. You know, and I know, that our children spend fewer days in school than those in comparable countries in Europe. We spend shorter school days than those in comparable countries in Europe. And it takes a toll at the end of the day. We know that our students, compared with those in other Western nations, do not rank well in science and in math. Because of that, the President and Congress have established No Child Left Behind. I'm afraid most children are still being left behind, despite that good goal that they have. So we have to do something about it. In a very small way, I've been trying to educate young people about the judicial branch of government. We'll move on to those other 2 after we get this one solved. But we're coming close to solving it. We now have an online program for middle schoolers. Those are the years when the light bulb turns on up here, and they're eager to learn. And we've done an interactive program that is very fun and exciting, easy for the teachers, and wonderful for the young people because it includes interactive games they can play that teach in the process. Now, this audience represents people from every state. It's my idea that you should go home to your state and try to get your state to make a better push for better education and request that schools do something more innovative. And while you're at it, take a look at the new website, www.ourcourts.org. And thank you. Well, let's all come back next year better educated, okay?